The clinking of silver against fine china stopped the second the thick white envelope hit the mahogany table. Aunt Judy slid it across the linen cloth, stopping right next to my dinner plate. A formal termination letter. She leaned back, swirling her red wine, a smug grin twisting her lips. She announced to the entire family that my 8 years of bleeding for this company was over. Her 24-year-old daughter, Elmira, was taking my place. According to Judy, my complex payroll architecture was garbage. Elmira was going to replace the whole thing with a basic spreadsheet. I stared at the head of the table. My mother and father, the majority shareholders of our family construction empire, they refused to look up. My father burned a hole into his prime rib. My mother leaned toward me, her voice a pathetic whisper, begging me to just step aside and keep the peace. A cold, heavy knot pulled tight in my chest. I unclipped my corporate access badge. I held it directly over my steaming bowl of soup and let it drop. The heavy plastic splashed into the broth. I pushed my chair back, the wood scraping violently against the marble floor, and walked out the front door. The drive back to my apartment was completely silent. I am Sarah. I am 46 years old, and for the last 8 years, I was the invisible spine keeping titanium construction standing. While Aunt Judy hosted lavish charity galas and my cousin Elmira posed for graduation photos, I was awake at 3 o'clock in the morning. I was patching legacy databases, untangling multi-state tax codes, and dodging federal labor fines to make sure 12,000 union workers got their paychecks on time. They treated me like a disposable mechanic. They ground my youth into dust to build their wealth, but they forgot one crucial detail. The mechanic is the only one who knows how to keep the engine from exploding. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. A text from my mother flashed across the screen, begging me to send Elmira the admin passwords to keep the family together. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Judy's toxic greed was entirely predictable. My parents' cowardice was the bullet that actually hit bone. The people who were supposed to protect me chose to be complicit mannequins. They threw their own daughter to the wolves just to keep a fake, fragile illusion of a happy family intact. The deepest cuts never come from the blade of an enemy, they come from the utter silence of your own blood watching you bleed. I marched into my apartment and opened my laptop. There would be no hand-holding, no transition period. I drafted one final legally binding email copying the union representatives, the state labor board, and the corporate executives, effective immediately. I have been terminated without cause. All payroll operations, compliance protocols, and liability are now under the sole control of Elmira. One click, the message vanished into the servers. I shut the laptop, poured myself a heavy glass of dark Cabernet, and sat by the window in the quiet dark. The bomb was fully armed. All I had to do was wait for the clock to strike payday. The following week felt like watching a slow-motion train wreck from the comfort of a high-rise balcony. I ignored the company messaging channels and left my father's calls ringing into the void. I stayed inside my apartment, the silence only broken by the occasional chime of a news alert or a desperate rambling voicemail from Aunt Judy. Payday arrived on Friday morning. By 10 o'clock, the bomb I had spent 8 years trying to prevent finally detonated. Elmira's revolutionary spreadsheet had suffered a total systemic collapse. 12,000 worker profiles were processed through a series of broken formulas. Social security numbers were being used as hourly rates. Federal tax withholdings were calculated as negative values. In one single click, Elmira had managed to miscalculate $5 million in federal taxes and leave 12,000 men working in 110 degrees reheat without a cent in their bank accounts. By noon, the stop work orders started hitting. 4 major state bridge projects across the Southwest went quiet as union workers parked their cranes and walked off the job. We were losing millions in daily penalty clauses, but the real threat was coming from the bank. Because of the massive tax discrepancy, our primary lender issued an immediate notice of default. They gave the company until 5 o'clock that evening to restore order or they would freeze our $15 million operating line of credit. Judy wasn't just incompetent, she was desperate. She had secretly leveraged company assets to cover her own failing private real estate debts, and she needed Elmira in my seat to rubber stamp the fake vendor invoices that hid the missing money. Now her shield was gone. My phone lit up. It was a voicemail from Judy, her voice high and jagged with panic. She wasn't asking for help. She was screaming threats. claiming she would have me arrested for sabotage. Then came the texts from my parents, pleading with me to think of the family legacy and fix the mess. I looked at the clock, 3 o'clock. I left every message unanswered. I simply watched the wine in my glass catch the afternoon sun. I wasn't the one who broke the family legacy. I was the one holding the broken pieces together while they kicked me. Now the shards were finally cutting them, and I refused to be their bandage anymore. The roar of 12,000 men echoed through my apartment before I even turned on the news. I could see the live feeds on social media, trucks lining the highway, cranes standing motionless against the sky like skeletal remains of a dead giant. My former office was a fortress under siege. I walked into the glass-walled boardroom at exactly 4:15. The atmosphere was suffocating, the air thick with the smell of expensive perfume and cold, desperate sweat. Judy sat at the head of the table, her face a pale, blotched mask of panic. Almira sat next to her, staring at her laptop screen with wide, unblinking eyes, as if waiting for the spreadsheet to magically fix itself. Mr. Vance, the company's general counsel, stood by the window. He placed his leather briefcase on the table with a heavy metallic click that sounded like a judge's gavel, speaking with the clinical precision of a man who had already seen the end of the movie. He informed Judy that he had personally reviewed the tax discrepancies and the missing vendor payments. As an officer of the court, he was legally obligated to report this negligence to the federal authorities by the close of business, unless new management assumed immediate liability. Judy's eyes darted to my parents, but they remained frozen, their faces pale reflections of their own cowardice. Wasting a single breath on their betrayal was out of the question. I simply slid a single, crisp document across the polished mahogany table. It was an irrevocable proxy. Sign this and I take over voting control of the corporation right now, I said. My voice is cold as the server room I had spent 8 years maintaining. Sign it and I will use my personal override codes to authorize the bank's wire transfers before the 5 o'clock deadline. If you refuse, the bank freezes the accounts, the union files the lawsuit and you spend the next 10 years explaining your real estate debts to a federal auditor. Judy looked at the document, then at me. Her hand trembled so violently she had to grip the pen with both hands. She was suffocating in the vacuum she had created. With a jagged, desperate scrawl, she signed away her power. Mr. Vance picked up the document, checked the signature, and nodded to me. The board has been officially notified of the transition. Sarah, he said, snapping his briefcase shut. He promised to handle the federal agents when they arrived to discuss the previous management's errors, and walked out. For the first time in my life, I sat at the head of the table in absolute control. Judy retreated to her executive suite and locked the heavy oak door. A parasite never simply lets go when you pull it, it digs its teeth in deeper. Months ago, she filed an official technology report claiming her secondary physical banking token was lost in the mail. That was a lie. She kept that little black device buried at the bottom of her designer purse for exactly this kind of emergency, a stolen golden parachute. She locked herself inside her private bathroom. Her hands were sweating, but her greed remained steady. She used her personal phone to access the corporate treasury portal. Racing against the clock, she had a narrow 24-hour window before Mr. Vance's proxy paperwork fully cleared the banking administration. Her final plan was incredibly simple. She was going to wire $2 million to an untraceable offshore shell company, drain the last drops of the family's liquidity, and let the crumbling empire collapse directly onto my head. She typed in the routing numbers, she pressed the button on the token, she hit submit, but she walked blindly into a steel trap. I knew about the missing token the very day she reported it. I never deactivated the device. Instead, I tethered that exact serial number directly to our primary bank's strict fraud protocol, linking it straight to Almira's catastrophic federal tax audit. Sitting alone in the glass boardroom, my laptop screen illuminated the polished table. A bright red security banner flashed across the dashboard. Wire attempt flagged, capital flight detected, all corporate accounts immediately frozen. Within 60 seconds, the bank's lead compliance officer was ringing my direct line. He confirmed they had already forwarded the suspicious activity report to federal authorities. The trap snapped shut, perfectly severing her escape route. Judy thought she was a financial mastermind executing a brilliant last-minute heist. She was just a desperate rat grabbing the cheese right before the heavy metal bar came crashing down. Two federal agents walked through the lobby of Titanium Construction at 3:45 that afternoon. They bypassed the front desk entirely, marched straight to the executive suite, and pushed open the heavy oak door. Judy was escorted out through the glass double doors with her wrists locked in cold steel, her expensive purse sat abandoned on the bathroom counter. Almira thought her shiny new master's degree made her untouchable. She was entirely wrong. Her digital signature was stamped on every single one of those fraudulent federal tax submissions. The State Labor Board and the Internal Revenue Service tore her credentials apart. She is permanently blacklisted in the financial sector. No corporate firm in the country will ever let her within 10 feet of a payroll system again. Then came the architects of my misery, my parents. They blew up my phone for 3 straight days. They begged me to pay Judy's bail and pleaded with me to protect the family name. I replied with a single legal document, formally severing them both from my emergency trust fund. They chose to sit in silence while Judy tried to steal this empire blind. Now they can survive on whatever meager pension she forgot to drain. I blocked both of their numbers. I sit alone in the corner office. The protests in the parking lot are over. The heavy mahogany door is closed. For the first time in 8 years, the air in this building actually feels clean. I took an axe to my own family tree, and the toxic branches are finally gone. The gavel came down exactly 8 months later. The federal judge possessed zero sympathy for the Titanium Construction legacy. He sentenced my aunt to 8 years in a federal penitentiary with absolutely no eligibility for parole for the first 5 years. He also ordered a mandatory restitution of $2,400,000 to cover the corporate funds she systematically siphoned over the past decade. The social fallout was far swifter than the legal one. The prestigious country club revoked her membership before the trial even started. The women she used to host lavish charity galas with now crossed the street to avoid acknowledging her existence. Almira avoided a prison cell by turning state's evidence, but she was slapped with a civil penalty of $150,000 by the State Labor Board. Today, she works as a shift supervisor at a retail clothing store. As for my parents, the loss of their emergency trust fund forced a brutal reality check. They had to sell the sprawling family estate and move into a 2-bedroom condominium. They now survive on a fixed pension of $3,200 a month. A few weeks ago, a thick manila envelope arrived on my desk. The return address belonged to a federal correctional institution. It was a 6-page handwritten letter from my aunt. She filled the pages with words about family loyalty, claiming she only bent the rules to protect our legacy. She wrote that my parents were heartbroken, just waiting for me to pick up the phone and rebuild the bridge. I stopped reading halfway down the first page. The familiar rush of anger never arrived. The old, heavy guilt was completely absent. I felt only a quiet, absolute indifference. I slipped the pages into the mechanical shredder beside my desk and listened to the sharp whir of the steel blades turning her excuses into confetti. I left the office right at 5 o'clock that evening and drove to my real home. The living room was loud, filled with laughter, and the smell of roasted garlic. My college roommate, my first mentor from my early tech days, and the union foreman who stood by me during the strike were sitting around my dining table. We shared a simple meal. There was no polished silverware or expensive wine, but there were no fake smiles either. For the first time in my life, I sat at a table where I did not have to earn my right to eat. I was surrounded by people who chose me, a place where love was a given, not a transaction. So many of us are trapped in the illusion of family entitlement. We are taught from birth that blood is a binding contract. We are told to bleed ourselves dry to water the family tree, even if that tree is rotting from the inside out. Toxic relatives weaponize shared genetics to demand endless unreciprocated sacrifice. But the truth is much simpler and much colder. Rule number 1: blood is biology, family is respect. Sharing a last name does not grant anyone a license to abuse your sanity or steal your worth if they treat you like a disposable tool. You owe them absolutely nothing when you finally unplug the machine. Rule number 2: the cruelest forgiveness is enablement. When you cover for an arrogant abuser, you are digging your own grave. Sometimes the truest form of justice is simply stepping out of the way and letting them face the legal and financial destruction they built with their own 2 hands. Rule number 3: never negotiate your value with cowards. Bystanders who demand you keep the peace while you are being attacked are just as dangerous as the one holding the knife. Silence in the face of cruelty is just cruelty in a different outfit. You are allowed to walk away from a burning house, even if you grew up inside it. I am Sarah and I am finally free. Have you ever had to cut off a rotting branch to save the rest of your tree? Tell me your story in the comments and share this with someone who needs the courage to walk away from the table. I know exactly what you are screaming at the screen right now. You are sitting there asking, why on earth did Sarah stay at that company for 8 years? Why did she let her aunt and her own parents treat her like a disposable mechanic for almost a decade before finally walking away? It is easy to judge from the outside, but let me tell you what was actually happening in her brain. Sarah was not stupid and she was not weak. She was trapped by a psychological phenomenon called the slot machine effect, formerly known as intermittent reinforcement. Toxic families and manipulative bosses do not abuse you 100% of the time. If they did, you would pack your bags and leave on day one. Instead, they drop tiny crumbs of hope. They give you a rare compliment, an invitation to a lavish family dinner, or a vague promise that your hard work will eventually be rewarded. You keep pulling the lever, working those 3 in the morning shifts, hoping to finally hit the jackpot of their respect, but the machine is rigged. You are never going to win because they never intended to pay out. But when Sarah finally woke up to the reality of that dinner table, she did not just throw an emotional tantrum, she executed an absolute masterclass in financial self-defense. Let us break down her smartest moves so you can use them if you ever find yourself in the blast zone of a toxic relationship. First, she used the documenting strategy to build her case. When she walked out, she did not just disappear into the night, she sent a legally binding email to the corporate executives, the state labor board, and the union, officially handing over the liability to Almira. Toxic people thrive in gray areas and verbal agreements. When you put a timeline and a boundary in writing, you completely strip away their ability to gaslight you later. Second, she used the audit strategy. When the $5 million tax disaster hit, Sarah did not rush in to save the day just to win back her parents' affection. She let the natural consequences hit the floor. Entitled people hate the harsh light of reality. Instead of arguing with them, Sarah let the bank default notices and the federal auditors do the heavy lifting for her. Finally, she executed the ultimate buyout. When Sarah returned to that glass boardroom, she did not ask for a fake apology. She brought a corporate lawyer and a legally binding proxy contract. She invested in her own freedom by seizing control when they were at their weakest, and that brilliant trap with the physical banking token. That is a golden rule for life. Never trust a thief to hand over all the keys. Put a silent alarm on the one they claim they lost and let them catch themselves. At the end of the day, your loyalty is a highly valuable currency. Stop spending it on people who are actively trying to bankrupt your spirit. Blood might make you relatives, but consistent mutual respect is the only thing that makes you family. Have you ever had to use a paper trail or a strict boundary to protect yourself from a toxic boss or a manipulative relative? Drop your survival tactics in the comments below to help out someone else who might be going through it right now. Make sure to subscribe for more real life strategies and always remember your peace of mind is your ultimate profit.